The Great Depression was a time of unrelenting hardship, but it was also an era of unbridled resourcefulness, particularly in the kitchen. With food scarce and budgets tighter than ever, home cooks had to get creative, relying on scraps, leftovers, and clever hacks to make meals that were both nourishing and satisfying. These 30 food hacks, born out of necessity and frugality, not only helped families survive during this tumultuous time, but also left a lasting legacy in American cuisine, reminding us that, even in the toughest of times, a little bit of ingenuity and culinary know-how can go a long way. 1. Watered down milk. Have you ever heard of watered down milk? Yeah, sounds kind of sad, right? But back in the Great Depression, this wasn't just a trick, it was survival. Families had to make every last drop of food stretch, and milk. That was a luxury. So what did they do? They stretched it. Picture this. It's the 1930s. Jobs are gone, money is tight, and food? It's whatever you can make last the longest. Milk was essential. Kids needed it. People used it for cooking, and it was one of the few sources of protein and fat in a lot of homes. But buying fresh milk every day? Not an option. So, families came up with a hack, diluting milk with water. Half milk, half water, sometimes even less. It made the milk last twice as long. Was it delicious? Probably not. But did it get the job done? Absolutely. Some even got creative by adding flour to thicken it up, or a little sugar to make it taste better. This was more than just a food hack. It was a survival strategy. Watered down milk was a symbol of resilience. And honestly, it makes you appreciate what we have today. 2. Meat extenders. Did you know that during the Great Depression, people found a way to make a single pound of meat stretch across multiple meals? Yeah, when times were tough, folks had to get creative, and that's where meat extenders came in. A genius food hack that kept families fed when money was tight. So, what exactly is a meat extender? It's anything cheap and filling that can be mixed with meat to make it go further. Think breadcrumbs, oats, beans, rice, potatoes, whatever was on hand. These ingredients absorbed flavor, added bulk, and made sure no one went to bed hungry. One of the most famous examples? Depression-era meatloaf. Instead of being 100% ground beef, it was mixed with crushed crackers, mashed beans, or even grated vegetables. The result? A meal that tasted hearty but cost way less. This wasn't just about survival, it changed how we cook forever. Many of today's comfort foods, from meatballs to casseroles, still use these tricks. And with food prices rising again, maybe it's time we bring back some of these old-school hacks. What do you think? Would you try a Great Depression meat extender meal today? 3. Using animal parts. Picture this. It's the 1930s, the Great Depression is in full swing, and food is scarce. People were not just looking for a good deal, they were fighting to put anything on the table. And one of the smartest survival hacks? Using every single part of an animal for food. Back then, nothing went to waste. If you butchered a pig, cow, or chicken, you weren't just taking the prime cuts. You were using the organs, bones, skin, and even feet. That meant liver, kidneys, and hearts became staples, while bones were boiled down for nutrient-rich broth. Even pig's feet and cow tongues found their way onto dinner plates. People got creative. Lard replaced butter. Brains were fried like delicacies. Even blood was used for soups and puddings. And guess what? These weren't just desperate choices. Many of these cuts are packed with vitamins and protein. Today, we pay top dollar for bone broth and organ meats, but back then, it was just smart survival. So next time you see a pricey nose-to-tail meal, remember that this wasn't a trend. It was a food hack that kept families alive when times were toughest. 4. Reusing cooking grease. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness was key to survival. With food and money scarce, families found creative ways to stretch every ingredient to its fullest potential. One such food hack was reusing cooking grease, a practice that not only added flavor to meals, but also prevented waste. Instead of discarding bacon drippings, lard, or leftover frying oil, families stored it in jars for future use. Cooking grease became a valuable kitchen staple, used for frying, baking, and even seasoning vegetables. It added richness to meals that might have otherwise been bland due to limited ingredients. Grease was also used to make gravies and sauces, providing much-needed calories and flavor to meals of beans, potatoes, and cornbread. Beyond cooking, rendered fat had other practical applications. Some used it to make homemade soap, or as a substitute for butter when baking. In extreme cases, grease was even used as fuel for lamps. Every bit was repurposed, demonstrating the ingenuity and resilience of those who lived through tough times. Today, while reusing grease is less common, the practice remains a reminder of the importance of reducing waste and making the most of available resources, just as our ancestors did to survive. 5. Hoover stew. You ever wonder how people survived during the Great Depression, when food was scarce and money was tight? Well, meet Hoover stew, a budget-friendly meal that kept thousands of families from going hungry in the 1930s. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. And believe it or not, some folks still swear by it today as a cheap-filling food hack. During the Great Depression, soup kitchens and government relief programs had to stretch every dollar. That's where Hoover stew came in. Named after President Herbert Hoover, who got blamed for the economic collapse, this meal was basically a mix of whatever people had on hand, usually canned tomatoes, hot dogs, macaroni, and beans. Here's how you'd make it. Boil some pasta, chop up a few hot dogs, toss in a can of tomatoes, and mix in beans or corn if you had them. Let it all simmer, and boom, you had a meal that could feed an entire family for pennies. It wasn't gourmet, but it certainly kept people alive. 6. Depression-era meatloaf. Up next, we have Depression-era meatloaf. Times were tough. The stock market had crashed, jobs were gone, and families were struggling just to put food on the table. But when you've got mouths to feed and barely $1 to your name, you get creative. From that creativity, Depression-era meatloaf was born, the ultimate survival food hack of the 1930s. Meat was expensive, and stretching every last bite was crucial. So, home cooks got smart. They took a little bit of ground beef if they were lucky enough to have it, and stretched it with fillers like breadcrumbs, oats, or even crushed crackers. Some even used mashed potatoes. The goal? Make a tiny bit of meat to feed an entire family. Eggs or evaporated milk held it all together, while onions and spices gave it some much-needed flavor. Then, they'd bake it up, sometimes topping it with ketchup or gravy to keep it from drying out. This wasn't just a meal, it was survival. And believe it or not, this humble dish is still a budget-friendly, delicious way to feed a family today. The Great Depression taught us resilience, and sometimes that lesson comes in the form of a meatloaf. 7. Carrot or potato. Coffee. Did you know that during the Great Depression, people brewed coffee from carrots and potatoes? Yeah, desperate times called for some pretty creative food hacks. With real coffee scarce and expensive, people had to get resourceful, so they turned to their gardens. Instead of tossing out carrots and potatoes, folks discovered that they could roast, grind, and brew them into a surprisingly decent coffee alternative. The trick? Slow roasting chopped carrots or potatoes until they turn dark brown, then grinding them up like coffee beans. When steeped in hot water, they released a rich, earthy flavor. Definitely not Starbucks, but it did the trick. The 1930s were brutal. Unemployment soared, money was tight, and luxuries like coffee became a rare treat. But people didn't just sit back and suffer, they got creative. Some even mixed carrot or potato grounds with whatever real coffee they had left, stretching their supply for weeks. While today, we can sip on endless lattes, this food hack is a reminder of how past generations made do with what they had. So, would you try a cup of carrot or potato coffee? Let us know in the comments. 8. Cornbread. The Great Depression was one of the hardest times in American history. Food was scarce, and families had to get creative just to survive. One of the most underrated survival hacks? Cornbread instead of traditional bread. Why cornbread, you might ask? Simple. Cornmeal was cheap, lasted longer than flour, and didn't require yeast, something that was hard to come by. Plus, it could be made with just a few ingredients. Cornmeal, water, maybe a little fat if you were lucky. This wasn't just food, it was survival. Families paired it with beans, dipped it in milk, or even crumbled it into soup to make meals stretch. Cornbread was filling, easy to make, and most importantly, it kept people from going hungry. Hard times call for smart solutions, and cornbread was one of the Great Depression's most brilliant food hacks. But hey, who knew survival could taste this good? 9. Rice and beans as a staple. You've probably heard of rice and beans as a cheap meal, but did you know it was a lifesaver during the Great Depression? Families across America relied on this simple dish to stretch their food supply, stay full, and survive one of the hardest economic crises in history. During the 1930s, jobs disappeared, money was tight, and food was scarce. Many families had to get creative with whatever they could afford. Along came rice and beans, nutritious, filling, and incredibly cheap. Rice and beans weren't just cheap, they were packed with protein, fiber, and essential nutrients. When combined, they made a complete protein, giving people the energy they needed to push through hard times. This simple meal became a survival hack, passed down through generations. Even today, it remains a go-to for stretching a food budget. So, next time you enjoy rice and beans, remember, you're eating a piece of history. 10. Leftover bread pudding. The Great Depression was one of the toughest times in American history. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and food? Well, you made do with what you had. That's where bread pudding comes in, one of the ultimate survival food hacks. Bread pudding wasn't just a dessert back then, it was a lifeline. Families couldn't afford to waste anything, so they took their stale leftover bread and turned it into a warm, filling dish. With just a few cheap ingredients, milk, sugar, eggs, and whatever scraps of fruit or spices were lying around, people transformed dry, inedible bread into something comforting and delicious. Nothing went to waste. We ate what we had, and we made it work. So, next time you've got leftover bread, remember, it's not just food, it's history on a plate. 11. Dandelion greens for salad. During the Great Depression, when food was scarce and every penny mattered, resourceful families turned to nature for sustenance. One of the most underrated survival foods of that era was dandelion greens. Often dismissed as a pesky weed, dandelions provided a free, nutritious, and readily available source of food that helped many families endure hard times. Dandelion greens were particularly valuable because they grew abundantly in fields, yards, and along roadsides without the need for cultivation. Packed with vitamins A, C, and K, as well as minerals like calcium and iron, these greens became a vital addition to Depression-era diets. Families would gather fresh leaves in the spring when they were tender and less bitter, using them in simple salads, sautéed dishes, or soups. To reduce bitterness, many home cooks soak the leaves in salt water or blanch them before use. When combined with vinegar, bacon drippings, or boiled potatoes, dandelion greens transformed into a hearty and flavorful meal. This simple food hack not only provided nourishment, but also demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of people during economic hardship. Today, dandelion greens are making a comeback as a nutritious superfood, but for many, they remain a symbol of survival and resourcefulness. 12. Acorn flour for baking. Imagine trying to survive the Great Depression with barely any food. No bread, no flour, and definitely no extra cash to buy what little was left on store shelves. People had to get creative. And that's where acorn flour comes in. Yep, the same acorns that squirrels stash away for winter were actually a survival hack for families struggling to put food on the table. Acorns are packed with nutrients, but they're naturally bitter because of tannins. So, people had to soak or boil them to remove that bitterness before drying and grinding them into a fine flour. Once prepared, acorn flour became a cheap, life-saving alternative to wheat flour. People used it for bread, pancakes, and even soups. Sure, it wasn't as fluffy as regular flour, but in desperate times, it kept families from starving. So, next time you see acorns on the ground, remember, they're not just for squirrels. They once helped people survive one of the toughest times in history. 13. Homemade vinegar. Ever wonder how people survived the Great Depression when money was tight and food was scarce? One secret weapon, homemade vinegar. This simple, almost magical food hack turned scraps into something useful and saved families from wasting precious ingredients. Let's dive into how vinegar helped people stretch their resources and why it's still a game changer today. Back in the 1930s, wasting food wasn't an option. If fruit started to rot, you didn't throw it out, you turned it into vinegar. Apple peels, overripe grapes, even potato scraps could be fermented into a tangy, shelf-stable vinegar that added flavor to meals and acted as a preservative. People used homemade vinegar for everything, pickling vegetables, tenderizing tough cuts of meat, and even cleaning their homes. It was also a key ingredient in Depression-era poor man's meals like vinegar pie and soup, adding acidity and depth to otherwise bland dishes. The best part? Anyone could make it with just sugar, water, and time. In a world where every penny mattered, this DIY hack kept families fed in fridges or ice boxes stocked. So, is homemade vinegar still worth making today? Absolutely. Whether you're into DIY food hacks or just want to waste less, this Depression-era trick is pure gold. Try it yourself and keep history alive. 14. EGG substitutes. Alright, picture this. It's the 1930s. The Great Depression is in full swing. Money is tight, jobs are disappearing, and grocery store shelves, they might as well be empty. But people still had to eat. And eggs, one of the most common and versatile ingredients, were suddenly a luxury. So, what did people do? They got creative. Egg substitutes were the ultimate survival hack. Folks figured out that they could swap out eggs with all sorts of things like mashed bananas, applesauce, vinegar, and baking soda, or even a bit of gelatin. Crazy, right? But it worked. These substitutes kept cakes fluffy, pancakes together, and biscuits from turning into bricks. One of the most popular tricks, mixing a tablespoon of vinegar with baking soda, it mimicked the leavening power of eggs, giving bread and cakes that perfect rise. Another go-to was a blend of cornstarch and water, which acted as a thickener in recipes like custards and puddings. Fast forward to today, and we're still using these hacks, whether you're vegan, allergic, or just ran out of eggs at midnight. Turns out, the Great Depression wasn't just about survival, it was about innovation. 15. Mock apple pie. Apples were expensive, hard to find, and not exactly a priority when every penny counts. But people still craved comfort food. And what's more American than apple pie? Along came the birth of the legendary mock apple pie, a genius food hack that gave folks the taste of apple pie without a single apple in sight. So, what was the secret ingredient? Ritz crackers. Yep, you heard that right. The recipe, popularized by Nabisco, called for crushed crackers, sugar, cinnamon, and a little lemon juice to mimic the tartness of apples. Once baked inside a golden, flaky crust, it looked and tasted like the real deal, at least enough to fool your taste buds in tough times. This wasn't just a gimmick, it was a survival strategy. Families got creative, stretching limited ingredients to make the foods they loved. And the best part? Mock apple pie actually kinda works. Even today, you will find people making it for fun or nostalgia. So, next time you're low on fruit but still want a slice of history, why not give it a shot? You might be surprised. 16. Canning fruits and vegetables. Imagine living in a time when every penny mattered, food was scarce, and survival meant getting creative. That was life during the Great Depression. And one of the greatest food hacks that kept families from going hungry? Canning. Back in the 1930s, people didn't have the luxury of food delivery apps or giant grocery stores stocked with everything year-round. They had to make do with what they had, so they turned to canning. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. Families preserved everything from tomatoes to peaches, green beans to pickles, making sure that nothing went to waste. Mason jars filled with summer's harvest lined pantry shelves, providing food through the brutal winters when fresh produce was impossible to find. The process was simple but effective: boil, seal, store. And it worked. Those who mastered canning stretched their food supply for months, sometimes even years. Today, canning is making a comeback, not just as a nostalgic nod to the past, but as a practical, money-saving, and self-sufficient way to live. So, is it time to bring back this Great Depression food hack? Absolutely. Because if history taught us anything, it's that being prepared is never a bad idea. 17. Stretching butter with margarine or lard. During the Great Depression, families were doing whatever it took to stretch their meals, and one genius hack that kept people fed? Stretching butter with margarine or lard. Butter was expensive, if you could even get your hands on it. Margarine and lard, on the other hand, was cheaper, more available, and when mixed with butter, practically a magic trick. People would take a small amount of butter, whip it together with margarine or lard, sometimes adding a bit of milk or salt, and boom, you just doubled your spread. This wasn't just about taste, it was also about survival. That stretched out butter lasted longer, kept food from being too dry, and added just enough fat to make meals feel filling. And get this, some folks even mixed a little yellow food coloring into margarine to make it look more like the real thing. Today, we might not think twice about grabbing a tub of spreadable butter, but back then, this was innovation. It's a reminder that when times are tough, people get creative, and who knows, maybe this old school trick might just come in handy again someday. 18. Storing potatoes and onions in root cellars. Picture this. It's the 1930s. The Great Depression is in full swing. Jobs are gone, money is tight, and food? Well, if you didn't know how to store it properly, you were in trouble. That's where the root cellar comes in. A genius, old-school food hack that kept families from going hungry. Potatoes and onions were two of the ultimate survival foods. They were cheap, lasted months, and packed enough calories to keep people going. But storing them wrong? That meant rot, waste, and empty bellies. Smart homesteaders knew the trick. A cool, dark, well-ventilated root cellar. Potatoes? They needed humidity and total darkness to stay firm. Onions? They wanted dry air and a bit of breathing room to avoid sprouting. Keep them separate, or the onions speed up the potatoes' spoilage. People layered potatoes in straw or sand, hung onions in mesh bags, and checked regularly for bad ones. This Depression-era food hack wasn't just about survival. It was about stretching every dollar and making food last as long as possible. And guess what? It still works today. Want to store food like your great-grandparents? The root cellar trick is one you don't want to forget. 19. During the Great Depression, food preservation became a necessity as families struggled to make ends meet. One of the most effective and accessible methods was sun-drying fruits. This simple yet vital hack helped people extend the shelf life of perishable fruits, ensuring they had food through harsh economic times. Sun-drying required minimal resources, just sunlight, air circulation, and time. Families would slice apples, peaches, plums, and berries, then lay them on clean cloths or wooden racks under the sun. The natural drying process removed moisture, preventing spoilage and preserving essential nutrients. Dried fruits were easy to store, lightweight, and could be rehydrated for cooking or eaten as a snack. This method was particularly useful for those who relied on backyard gardens or foraged fruits. In rural areas, entire communities worked together, sharing drying techniques and trading surplus dried goods. Some even turned their preserved fruits into simple pies, stews, or homemade fruit leathers. Sun-drying fruits exemplified the resilience and resourcefulness of people during the Great Depression. It not only helped families survive, but also laid the foundation for modern-day food preservation techniques still used today. This old-fashioned food hack remains a valuable skill for sustainable living. 20 homemade pickles and fermented foods. During the Great Depression, there were no grocery store trips with carts full of goodies. Instead, families had to get creative, and one of the biggest food hacks of the era, homemade pickles and fermented foods. This wasn't just about flavor, it was pure survival. With refrigerators being a luxury and fresh produce hard to come by, people turned to old-school methods to make food last months, even years. Cabbage became sauerkraut, cucumbers turned into crunchy pickles, and milk was transformed into tangy yogurt or buttermilk. Fermentation wasn't just about preserving food, it actually made it healthier. The process created gut-friendly probiotics and added essential vitamins, which were crucial when diets were lacking. Families filled massive crocks with vegetables, salt, and thyme, turning cheap, homegrown produce into a goldmine of flavor and nutrition. And guess what? These same techniques still work today. If you've ever thought about making your own pickles or kimchi, you're tapping into a survival secret that kept millions fed during one of history's toughest times. Old-school food hacks for the win. 21. Potato pancakes. The Great Depression hit hard. Money was tight, jobs were scarce, and food? Well, you had to get real creative. Then, we invented potato pancakes, the ultimate survival food hack. Back then, potatoes were cheap, filling, and easy to grow, making them a go-to for struggling families. But plain boiled potatoes? Boring. So, people got smart. They grated them, mixed in a little flour, maybe an egg if they were lucky, and fried them up into crispy, golden brown perfection. The result? A meal that was dirt cheap but packed with enough carbs to keep you going. These bad boys weren't just delicious, they were a lifeline. You could make them with the bare minimum and stretch a few potatoes into a meal for the whole family. Some folks even added onions or whatever scraps they had lying around. And the best part? You could eat them plain, with applesauce, or even dipped in whatever gravy was available. Fast forward to today, and potato pancakes are still a comfort food classic. But back then, they were a Depression-era food hack that helped millions make it through tough times, one crispy bite at a time. 22. Grapes or ripe fruit as a sweetener. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness in the kitchen was a necessity. With sugar being expensive and sometimes scarce, families turned to natural alternatives, such as grapes and other ripe fruits, to sweeten their meals. This simple yet effective food hack allowed people to enjoy some sweetness without relying on costly store-bought sugar. Grapes, when fully ripened, contain natural sugars that could be extracted and used in baking, preserves, and even beverages. Some families dried grapes into raisins, which could then be rehydrated and mashed into a natural syrup. Others used overripe bananas, apples, or pears as sweeteners in cakes and bread, making use of whatever they had on hand. Fruit preserves became a staple, as people boiled down overripe fruits to create thick, sweet spreads without needing added sugar. The natural fermentation of grapes was also used to produce homemade wines or syrups, which could enhance flavors in both desserts and savory dishes. This practice not only helped families stretch their budgets, but also introduced a healthier, unprocessed way to add sweetness to meals. Even today, using ripe fruit as a sweetener remains a valuable, wholesome alternative, inspired by the resilience of those who endured the Great Depression. 23. Peanut butter and onion sandwiches. All right, picture this. You're in the middle of the Great Depression, money's tight, food is scarce, and you gotta get creative in the kitchen. I introduced the peanut butter and onion sandwich. Yeah, you heard that right. It might sound bizarre today, but back then, it was a game changer. So, why this unusual combo? Well, peanut butter was cheap, packed with protein, and had a long shelf life. Basically, a survival essential. Onions, dirt cheap and easy to grow. Put them together, and boom, you've got a meal that's surprisingly nutritious and, according to some, even kinda tasty. The sharpness of the onion cuts through the creamy richness of the peanut butter, making for a weirdly satisfying bite. During the Great Depression, families had to get inventive to stretch their food supplies. Things like meat were a luxury, so people turned to whatever they could find. And believe it or not, peanut butter and onion sandwiches weren't just a last resort. They actually became a staple in some households. Fast forward to today, and while most of us wouldn't dream of putting onions on our PB&J, this sandwich stands as a reminder of human resilience and the power of thinking outside the lunchbox. 24. Boiled potatoes and gravy. Back in the 1930s, the Great Depression was in full swing. Jobs scarce, money even scarcer. Families had to get creative just to put food on the table. And one of the most legendary survival hacks of that era, boiled potatoes and gravy. Now, why potatoes? Simple, they were cheap, filling, and easy to store. You could buy them in bulk, and they lasted for weeks. Plus, they packed just enough nutrients to keep you going. Boil them, mash them, fry them, whatever it took to make a meal stretch. But here's where things get interesting. Gravy. See, plain potatoes could only take you so far. But a little homemade gravy? That's where the magic happened. Families would use drippings from whatever meat they could get their hands on, sometimes just bacon grease or even water mixed with flour to create a rich, savory sauce that made a meal feel like a feast. This wasn't just food, it was survival ingenuity. The ultimate budget hack before budget hacks were even a thing. And let's be real, boiled potatoes and gravy, still a solid comfort meal today. Would you try it? Let us know in the comments below. 25. Chipped beef on toast. During the Great Depression, putting food on the table was a daily struggle, but out of the hardship came some of the most creative survival meals in history. One of the most famous? Chipped beef on toast, also known as SOS, and let's just say the S stands for stuff. This dish was the ultimate budget hack. It's simple. Dried, salty beef, chopped up, and simmered in a creamy white sauce, then poured over toast. No fancy ingredients, no expensive meats, just whatever you could scrape together to make a filling meal. The magic of chipped beef on toast was its sheer efficiency. The dried beef had a long shelf life, so it didn't spoil easily. The creamy sauce stretched tiny portions of meat to feed a whole family. And bread? Cheap, available, and the perfect vehicle to soak up that rich, salty gravy. Fast forward to today, and this Depression-era staple still holds up. Sure, we're not all living off war rations, but as a quick, budget-friendly comfort food, it's a hack that stood the test of time. Would you try it? Let us know. 26. Ketchup or mustard sandwiches.
Up next, we have ketchup or mustard sandwiches.
The Great Depression was a time of extreme economic hardship. forcing families to get creative with food. With limited access to meat, fresh produce, and other staples, people turned to inexpensive and readily available ingredients to make meals stretch. Among the most well-known food hacks of the era were ketchup and mustard sandwiches. Simple but effective ways to fill an empty stomach. Ketchup sandwiches consisted of 2 slices of bread with a thin layer of ketchup, providing a hint of sweetness and acidity that mimicked the taste of tomato-based spreads. Meanwhile, mustard sandwiches offered a tangy, slightly spicy kick, which helped add flavor to an otherwise bland meal. Both condiments were cheap, did not require refrigeration, and were often available in diners or borrowed from neighbors. These sandwiches symbolize the resilience and ingenuity of those who endured the Depression. They highlight the lengths to which people went to survive when money and resources were scarce. While today, they might be considered an oddity or even a nostalgic throwback, they remain an important reminder of the struggles faced by past generations and the creativity born from necessity. 27. Poor man's soup. One of the most ingenious food hacks of the Great Depression was the poor man's soup, a simple, nourishing meal that stretched whatever ingredients were available. Poor man's soup had no fixed recipe. Its beauty lay in its flexibility. People would use whatever scraps they had: potatoes, onions, carrots, beans, or even foraged greens. If they were lucky, they might add a bit of meat or broth, but often, water and seasonings had to do. Leftover bread or flour dumplings made it more filling. Soup was a survival staple because it maximized nutrition while requiring minimal ingredients. By simmering vegetables and starches together, families could extract every bit of flavor and sustenance from their food. Community soup kitchens often served variations of it to feed the hungry. Even today, poor man's soup remains a testament to resilience and resourcefulness. In times of financial hardship, the same principles apply: stretch ingredients, waste nothing, and get creative. What was once a necessity has become a budget-friendly, nostalgic dish that reminds us of the strength and ingenuity of past generations. 28. Fried dough or biscuits. Next on our list is fried dough or biscuits. During the Great Depression, money was pretty impossible to come by. Families were struggling just to put food on the table. But when times get tough, people get creative, and that creativity gave birth to fried dough and biscuits, the ultimate survival food hack. These weren't just snacks, they were lifelines. Flour was cheap, lard was available, and with just a little water or milk, you had the foundation for something filling. Fry up some dough, and boom, you've got a crispy golden treat that could be sweet or savory. Add a little sugar or honey. Dessert. Need something heartier? Throw in salt and whatever scraps of meat or gravy you could find, and suddenly, it's dinner. Biscuits were another game changer. Unlike bread, they didn't need yeast, which meant no waiting around to eat. Just mix, bake, and serve. They could be stretched with whatever was on hand: cornmeal, mashed potatoes, even powdered milk. They weren't fancy, but they were warm, filling, and kept families going when the cupboards were almost bare. These Depression-era food hacks prove one thing: when resources run low, human ingenuity rises. And honestly, fried dough still slaps today. 29. Mock hamburgers. Next on our list, we have the mock hamburger, one of the most creative food hacks of the Great Depression era. Now, what exactly is a mock hamburger? Well, it's basically a burger, without the beef. Instead, people stretched what little protein they had by mixing things like oats, breadcrumbs, mashed beans, or even potatoes into their patties. Some used cheap cuts of meat, grinding them up and bulking them out. Others skipped the meat altogether and relied on things like peanut butter or flour-based mixtures to create a patty that sort of looked like a burger. The goal? Make something filling, cheap, and at least resemble a meal that people used to enjoy before the economy crashed the era. And you know what? It worked. Mock hamburgers kept families fed when times were tough. Fast forward to today, and we've got gourmet veggie burgers, impossible patties, and Beyond Meat. But back then, it wasn't about taste, it was about survival, and that's a food hack worth remembering. 30 homemade noodles. Last on our list is homemade noodles. Now, forget about the fancy box pasta we grab off the shelf today. Back then, people were making their own from just flour, eggs, and water. That's it. No preservatives, no frills, just a cheap, filling, and incredibly versatile staple that could turn a little into a lot. These noodles weren't just for spaghetti either. People tossed them into soups to bulk up a meal, stretched them with milk to make creamy casseroles, or fried them with whatever scraps of meat and veggies they could find. And the best part? They were easy to make, even for families who had never rolled dough in their lives. This wasn't just a recipe, it was survival, a way to feed hungry bellies when the grocery store was a luxury. Fast forward to today, and homemade noodles are still an affordable, delicious food hack. So maybe the past was onto something. So who's ready to roll out some dough? And there you have it, 30 food hacks that helped families stretch every last crumb during the Great Depression. It's a powerful reminder that resilience and creativity can turn even the simplest ingredients into a meal. While we may not face the same hardships today, these tips still hold value. Whether you're trying to save money, reduce food waste, or just get a little more resourceful in the kitchen. So, which of these Depression-era food hacks surprised you the most? Have you ever tried any of them? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this trip through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more incredible survival tips and food tricks. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay smart, stay thrifty, and keep cooking like a Great Depression survivor.